How will he take revenge for such a cruel betrayal by his wife and his brother? During the course of the day, it is not uncommon for the doorbell to ring with its loud ding-dong, but it is an immensely distressing experience when it wakes you up from sleep closer to midnight. During the course of what turned out to be a terrible movie, I became unconscious and lost consciousness. After my wife left for Uber, I realized that I had some free time on my hands which I decided to take advantage of. I made the decision to wait for her to return from her bachelorette party because I was no longer responsible for maintaining the safety of any children who were at home. I made it a practice to wait for her because, after 25 years of marriage, nothing in our home was in the manner that it should be. This was the reason why I made an effort to wait for her. As she made her way home after attending a bachelorette party, I wanted her to experience a sense of unease. Our wedding anniversary, which was tomorrow, was 25 years old, and there were 3 weeks remaining until it. Tomorrow was the beginning of the following week. A large-scale family celebration was something that one ought to have been looking forward to at this very moment. Nevertheless, fate had other plans in store for them. On the other hand, it was discovered that my wife was an adulterer. I had no idea that I would be a part of her life when this momentous day happened, and I was totally unprepared for it. In spite of the fact that she was oblivious of the information that I was aware of at the time, we had gotten married at a young age, had children in a short period of time, and were now empty nesters with no children at home to worry about in the event that we decided to end our relationship. If I'm being completely honest with you, I had no idea that I was going to divorce her, and I had previously intended to kill her 9 months ago. Both of those things were not anything I intended to do at any point. After conducting additional research, I discovered that not only was she having an affair with her old boss, but she had also most likely been having an affair with me for a number of years. This realization came about as a result of my investigation. Her boss was my brother Jake, who was the tallest and most beautiful of all the brothers in the family. I count myself really fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with him. In spite of the fact that he was 2 years older than I was, Jake was the kid in the family that everyone favored the most with their children. From the time I discovered that they had betrayed the life and soul of any party, under whose shadow I had lived my entire life up until this point, it has been many months since I discovered this information. While she was making arrangements for her bachelorette party, she made the error of leaving her phone open. This led to several complications. Notification of a WhatsApp message from my brother appeared on the screen, and it was immediately evident that the message was from him based on the first few words of the message. When I was about to deliver her phone, I accidentally pressed the button, which resulted in the screen becoming illuminated. I then handed it to her. The question "Are you ready for hardcore sex?" was posed to them while they were at work together for the majority of the day. The message could not have been more distinct. That was how all of the information that was included in the notification was presented. Consequently, I opened up the complete conversation that Jake had been having on WhatsApp, and I discovered additional information. "We will meet up at the usual location. I reserved the room number 245. You need only enter the room. Wait for me at 7:30 o'clock. Even though it's unfortunate that we won't be able to stay the night, I suppose you'll have to go back to Onan." These two scoundrels had been cheating on me for a considerable amount of time, as evidenced by the fact that there was a full stream of communications that provided all the evidence. In addition to the obvious betrayal, the manner in which they talked about him supplying what I was unable to was the thing that enraged me the most. When it came to making fun of and degrading me as a man, a lover, and a spouse, my wife joined my brother in doing so. My wife did a good job of concealing the fact that my feelings for her had become less intense over the course of the past few months. Of course, there were moments when she inquired about my well-being during the silent evenings when we did not speak, when we did not touch, and when we did not engage in the tender gestures that are often shared between a husband and wife. I never gave it much thought, expecting that it might at least bother her. I always dismissed it as nothing. It would appear that she was unconcerned about the fact that our sexual life had significantly deteriorated. Every Friday at the bachelorette party, her requirements were met 3 or 4 times a. It must have been a huge relief for her to not have to pretend that she liked having sex with me if she no longer loved me, judging by the messages that she sent. She had the ability to leave our marriage and have sexual relations with anybody she desired, but instead she chose to play games with me like a complete and utter idiot. Due to the fact that I loved her entirely, I would have preferred to have a divorce, despite the fact that it would have been painful. Before I got that fateful message, The only time our sexual life was allowed to deviate from the norm was when my brother and his family traveled to Florida for a period of 2 weeks. She began to rub her entire body against me late at night and early in the morning as the first weekend without him drew near. She was becoming more and more in love with me. In a fit of rage, I had sexual encounters with her on 2 separate occasions during those 2 weeks. Over the majority of the time, it was obvious that she was perplexed by my lack of interest. I wanted to put up even more of a fight against her, but not only did I require some relief for myself, but I also didn't want to entirely ignore her because that would let her realize that I was aware that she was a romantically involved person. Therefore, why didn't I immediately confront them for it? Attempt to relax. At the time, I was formulating my strategy to expose them. In all candor, you were under the impression that I was nothing more than a doormat for these 2 dishonest individuals. Without a shadow of a doubt, I was attempting to avoid being committed to a sentence of life in prison. I would rather not go through the anguish of being fooled by my wife and brother over the course of several months due to the fact that I would rather not experience it. On the other hand, if that is the way things turned out, I would rather accept it and move on with my life. I had the opportunity to think about literally dozens of possible tactics to put an end to them, and of course, rooting for their deaths was a big thing to do given the circumstances. The only times they were together were when they were engaging in sexual activity, when they were at work, or when they were attending a family function. I was able to eliminate them in a manner that would not be very obvious to anyone that I had been responsible for their deaths. Although there was a time when I contemplated paying for a piece of a family outing, I ultimately decided against doing so because doing so would put the lives of innocent people, including my own, at danger when we were all together as a family. I was curious as to whether or not there was a way to use carbon monoxide poisoning as a technique of killing without being discovered by the authorities. Nonetheless, the place that they used for their dates was cutting edge because it relied on solar energy to fulfill the majority of its heating and electrical requirements. It is true that there have been instances that have occurred at hotels, nonetheless. This is why it is not a viable explanation. I contemplated a great number of options, and I found that each one contained issues. Especially when we were all together as a large family, it started to feel like it was getting more and harder to maintain a normal sense of self while we were in the presence of any of them. By making an effort to avoid being overly blatant and giving the impression that their audience was unaware of their relationship, they were simply acting in the appropriate manner. On the other hand, having the knowledge that they were con artists of the worst sort, I witnessed brief glances and gestures, casual touches when they believed no one was looking, and sweet doves that caused my anger to rise over the course of several months. I was sickened to my stomach when I realized how much pleasure they derived from demonstrating to one another how much they enjoyed mistreating me. Not only from the sexual encounters, but also from the intimate moments that they had no right to share with one another. Their acts, in my perspective, demonstrated the level of disrespect that they had for both me and Orm. Although I have always been a little bit envious of my brother, they have always had my support. I have never given my wife any reason to dislike her, and I have never given them any reason to feel resentful of my brother. She never had sexual relations with me that did not involve at least one orgasm, and she frequently had more of them now that I was getting close to reaching my point of no return. I made sure to treat he. I devised my ultimate strategy, despite the fact that it was really foolish. I made the decision that I was going to expose their fraud, shoot both of them, and then try my luck with the judicial system, using the temporary insanity plea in the hopes of getting a favorable outcome. On the other hand, I was halted by the realization that I would probably certainly be sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and that my own life would be devastated just as much as theirs would be. In an ideal scenario, I would have been able to devise a strategy that would have enabled me to divulge the information that I was aware of to them and cause them to live in constant terror of divorce and the dissolution of both families, all the while making it abundantly apparent to me that I desired to take their life. A little time before our 25th wedding anniversary, I made the decision to take their lives. That was not up for discussion. If it were my 25th wedding anniversary, I would not celebrate it with my wife. My last plan was to follow her to a usual Friday night bachelorette party at the hotel, find out what room they were in, and then let the blood flow. Since the anniversary was on a Saturday, this was the strategy that I had in mind. At the moment when I was taking their life, I would look both of them in the eye. It's a blast. Someone is pounding on the door, and it's very annoying. I can only assume that the foolish wife has misplaced her keys. It's going to be me? It was my wife who was standing there when I opened the door, but instead of her, there were two officers from the police department. Officers O'Reilly and Bukowski were the ones who arrived at my location to introduce themselves, and the senior officer inquired as to whether or not they would be willing to arrive. Before Riley spoke, they gave off the impression of being in a very serious mood, and I opened the door for them to come inside. "Could you please tell me that your name is Mr. Richards and that you are Irene Richards' life partner?" After receiving my affirmative nod, he continued with his statement with confidence. "In reference to Mr. Richards, it is with a heavy heart that I must inform you that your wife passed away this evening as a consequence of injuries sustained in a car accident. I am deeply sorry to have to inform you of this. Moreover, your brother Jacob, who was driving the vehicle that they were in, was also killed before he could contribute anything to the discourse. He was the one who was driving the vehicle." I found myself laughing wildly, like if I were a psychopath. It was hard for me to comprehend how privileged I was. In addition to the fact that I was spared from going to jail, we also had policies that covered us for the long term. Among the reasons was the need to make certain that the mortgage was paid off in the event that the surviving spouse went away. This would ensure that the surviving spouse would not be obliged to sell the house when they passed away. The burden was not as high as it could have been because the mortgage was almost totally paid off. Nonetheless, there was another policy for $500,000. The burden was not as great as it could have been. Because of this, I will not only be able to avoid going to jail, but I will also be able to make significant progress toward bettering my financial situation. At that moment, the officers looked at me with concern and asked if they could make a phone call to someone who could be with me at this horrible hour. They asked if they could make the call. Please know that I am appreciative of your concern. Nonetheless, life has just done me a favor. I do not work in the field of law enforcement. Over the course of more than 9 months, they were engaging in an illegal romance. In an effort to put an end to this, I have spent the most of my waking hours trying to figure out how to accomplish this process. The end has finally arrived. The people who make up the natural justice system are involved. I am keeping up fine. In order to be more specific, I am going to celebrate by having a drink in the near future. To what extent would you be willing to accompany me?" They left, requesting that I call the morgue tomorrow in order to carry out a suitable identification procedure. In addition to the fact that they thought I was a jerk for taking pleasure in the murders of my wife and brother, they also left. Their refusal to be on duty was a given, of course. They were not aware of the fact that I intend to eliminate both of the traitors within the next 3 weeks because I had the good sense to keep that information a secret from them. The attempt to provoke problems would be a waste of time and would not be productive. For the time being, I will pretend to be a sad spouse in front of my friends and family. My actual feelings have already been transmitted to the authorities, but for the time being, I will pretend to be emotionally devastated. This will make it possible for me to collect the insurance money that I require in order to pay off the mortgage and improve my financial situation. During that particular night, I slept like a baby and went to check on them the next morning to make sure that they had not come back to life during the course of the night. As soon as I arrived at the morgue, I investigated both of the deceased individuals' bodies. My brother's wife and my sister-in-law wanted me to name both Jake and Irene because they were unable to accept this information and could not come to terms with it. For this reason, they wanted me to reveal their identities. The orderly warned me, "Damn, what a mess," and yes, from the looks of both of them, it probably happened quickly, but oh, how I hoped that they had time to understand what was coming next and that it was very painful. No matter how fast it turns out that the driver of the 18-wheeler had driven too many miles and hours that day, fell asleep at the wheel, and ran a red light running over them, causing their car to break into 2 separate pieces, leaving the passengers with no chance. How incredibly disheartening is that? There were no resurrections that took place over the night, which is a relief to those who were watching. The 2 bodies are still stoned to death, and they are getting ready to be consumed by the fires of hell. If we are being completely honest, a cremation is going to be the best option for her family. I will dispose of her ashes in the nearest trash can if no one is able to take custody of them. However, it would be highly appreciated if someone could take possession of them. All of my problems, which I had been struggling with for the past 9 months, have been solved. I am no longer experiencing any of them. Even if it is not necessary for me to ruin my future, there are some ways in which I would have been grateful for the opportunity to meet them in person before I took their lives. Some of these ways are listed below. Even though I have not yet accomplished anything, the fact that I was able to get rid of them without any consequences for my future is nevertheless a huge accomplishment. You need to have a great deal of affection for karma, because in spite of the fact that life may go on, it does not continue for these two scam artists. I was finally able to grin again after being in severe pain for a period of 9 months. Due to the fact that both of them are subscribers to our channel, it is guaranteed that your second conversation will not be played by another individual. Listen to the next story, because the one that follows after this one is nothing in comparison to the one that comes after it. Proceed to listen to the next story. Should you be younger than 18 years old, you should not even contemplate listening to the one that is about to be presented to you.